We are taught in school that World War I started with 2 bullets fired in Sarajevo. We are told it was a tragic accident of alliances, and that the killing of an archduke caused a chain reaction that no one wanted. But this is the version of history written for children. It is the version that ignores the cold, hard money side of empires. If you want to understand why millions of men died in the trenches and why the map of the Middle East looks the way it does today, you have to look past the assassination. You have to look at a map of the world in the year 1900 and find the one thing that frightened the British Empire more than any army or navy. It was not a weapon, it was a train line. This is the story of the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. It is the story of an iron road that promised to connect the heart of Europe to the oil fields of the Middle East and go around the British grip on global trade. It is the story of how the Ottoman Empire tried to escape the financial control of London and Paris only to walk straight into a trap that would destroy it completely. To understand this tragedy, we must first understand the world as it was at the start of the 20th century. The British Empire was the clear ruler of the world. Its power rested on 2 pillars. The first was the Royal Navy, which controlled every major ocean shipping route. The second was the Suez Canal in Egypt. The Suez Canal was the lifeline of the empire. It was the only way to quickly reach India, which was the crown jewel of the British system. As long as Britain controlled Suez, they controlled who could trade with the East. If you were a German merchant or a Russian trader and you wanted to send goods to India or China, you had to pass through British checkpoints. You had to follow British rules. But in the heart of Europe, a new power was rising. Germany had united in 1871 and was becoming an industrial giant. German factories were producing more than British factories. German science was admired around the world. But Germany had a problem. They had no empire. They had no large colonies to supply cheap raw materials. And worst of all, they had no navy that could challenge the British. Germany was a giant trapped in the center of Europe, surrounded by enemies and cut off from global markets by the British fleet. At the same time, to the southeast lay the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, the Ottomans had been a great power, but by the late 1800s, they were called the sick man of Europe. The empire was falling apart from the inside. They had lost land in the Balkans. Their army was outdated, but their biggest problem was debt. The Ottoman government was drowning in loans owed to British and French banks. In 1881, the empire went bankrupt. To pay their creditors, they were forced to give up control of their own economy to an organization called the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. This was a group of European bankers who directly collected taxes from Ottoman citizens. If a Turkish farmer sold salt, silk, or tobacco, the money did not go to the Sultan. It went into a bank vault in London or Paris. The Sultan at the time, Abdul Hamid II, was desperate. He knew his empire was being eaten away by foreign money. He needed a way to modernize his country and defend his borders without depending on the same people who were stealing from him. He needed infrastructure. He needed a railway that could move soldiers from Constantinople to the desert borders in days instead of months. But he knew that if he asked the British or French to build it, they would only tighten their control. This is where the goals of Germany and the Ottoman Empire met in a perfect storm. The German Kaiser Wilhelm II saw a chance that would change the balance of power forever. If Germany could build a railway connecting Berlin to Constantinople and then extend it all the way to Baghdad on the Persian Gulf, they could completely avoid the British Empire. Think about the shape of this. A train filled with German steel or chemicals could leave Berlin, travel through Vienna, cross the Balkans, enter Turkey, and reach the Indian Ocean without ever seeing a British ship. It would create a huge land trade route the Royal Navy could not stop. It would join Germany's industrial strength with the natural resources of the Middle East. For the Sultan, it was hope. For Germany, it was a road to world power. For Britain, it was a nightmare. Construction began with German money and German engineers. Deutsche Bank, the powerful German financial institution, led the project. The engineering was amazing for its time. They blasted tunnels through tall mountains and laid tracks across burning deserts. As the tracks moved east, panic spread in London. British planners looked at the map and saw a knife aimed at the heart of their empire. If the railway was finished, German soldiers could threaten the Suez Canal. German merchants could flood India with cheap goods. But there was something even more dangerous. If Germany could build a railway connecting Berlin to Constantinople and then extend it all the way to Baghdad on the Persian Gulf, they could completely avoid the British Empire. Think about the shape of this. A train filled with German steel or chemicals could leave Berlin, travel through Vienna, cross the Balkans, enter Turkey, and reach the Indian Ocean without ever seeing a British ship. It would create a huge land trade route the Royal Navy could not stop. It would join Germany's industrial strength with the natural resources of the Middle East. For the Sultan, it was hope. For Germany, it was a road to world power. For Britain, it was a nightmare. Construction began with German money and German engineers. Deutsche Bank, the powerful German financial institution, led the project. The engineering was amazing for its time. They blasted tunnels through tall mountains and laid tracks across burning deserts. As the tracks moved east, panic spread in London. British planners looked at the map and saw a knife aimed at the heart of their empire. If the railway was finished, German soldiers could threaten the Suez Canal. German merchants could flood India with cheap goods. But there was something even more dangerous than trade: oil. At that time, oil was just starting to replace coal as navy fuel. The British learned that oil burned hotter and cleaner than coal. It let ships move faster and stay at sea longer. Admiral Fisher, head of the Royal Navy, said the fleet had to switch to oil to survive. But Britain had no oil on its own land. They depended on supplies from Persia and the United States. Experts began to realize that the land the Baghdad Railway would cross, Mesopotamia, now called Iraq, was sitting on huge amounts of oil. The Germans had secured mineral rights for 20 kilometers on both sides of the tracks. This meant that if the railway was finished, Germany would control the fuel of future wars. They would control the oil the British Navy needed to survive. British leaders decided this railway could never be allowed to reach the sea. They used every tool they had to stop it. First, they tried diplomacy. They pressured the ruler of Kuwait, a small area at the end of the line, to sign a secret deal with Britain. He agreed not to lease land to foreign powers without British permission. This blocked the railway from reaching the Persian Gulf. It was a smart move that left the railway going nowhere. Then they used the press. British newspapers ran propaganda against the Ottoman Empire, calling them barbarians and accusing Germany of supporting tyranny. They described the railway not as trade, but as a weapon of control. Finally, they used money power. London refused to let British investors support the project. They tried to starve the railway of money, but Germany kept building. By 1914, the tracks reached the mountains of southern Turkey. The project was almost finished. The danger was real. This is the background for the start of World War I. The tensions between the great powers were not just about pride or borders. They were about who would control the world's economy. The Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia, was formed to surround Germany and stop its growth. Russia feared the railway would strengthen the Ottomans. France feared German economic power. Britain feared for India and Suez. When the war began, the first place Britain looked was not Berlin, it was the Middle East. The tragedy for the Ottoman Empire was that they tried to use European rivalry to save themselves, but were crushed by it. They joined Germany hoping victory would free them from debt. They hoped the railway would bring German weapons and supplies to help them retake lost lands in Egypt and the Caucasus. But they underestimated Britain's harsh determination. Britain was not just fighting an army, they were fighting to secure a valuable resource. As soon as the war began, British forces landed in Basra in southern Iraq. Officially, they said it was to protect oil refineries, but their real goal was to move north. They followed the path of the unfinished railway. They wanted to secure the oil fields of Mosul and Kirkuk first. The war in the Middle East was brutal. While soldiers in Europe died in mud, soldiers in Mesopotamia died from heat and disease. Britain suffered embarrassing defeats like the Siege of Kut, where an entire army surrendered to the Ottomans. But Britain had endless resources, and the Ottomans did not. The railway meant to save them was not finished. There were breaks in the tracks through the mountains. Supplies from Germany had to be unloaded, carried by truck or camel, and then loaded again onto trains. This delay strangled the Ottoman war effort. If the railway had been finished 5 years earlier, the war might have ended very differently. The slow movement of troops and supplies let Britain recover and eventually take Baghdad and Jerusalem. As the war dragged on, Britain and France met in secret. They had the land and the oil, but still needed to move that oil to Europe. The Baghdad Railway was now in their hands, but it was broken. The borders they created made travel harder. A train from Baghdad to Europe had to cross 3 different borders, use 3 currencies, and deal with 3 governments. The region's economic unity was destroyed on purpose. The colonial powers wanted a weak, divided Middle East. In the years after the war, Britain focused on pipelines instead of railways. Pipelines were easier to control. They carried only oil, not people or ideas. The Iraq Petroleum Company was created by British, French, and American oil companies. They built a pipeline from Kirkuk to the Mediterranean Sea. It followed the same logic as the railway, but now profits flowed only west. The people of the Middle East watched their wealth leave their land while their own development stayed poor. The dream of modern growth was replaced by simple extraction. But the idea behind the Baghdad Railway never fully died. A land bridge between Europe and Asia is too powerful to ignore. During World War II, the railway mattered again. Nazi Germany looked east. Hitler wanted the oil of Iraq and the Caucasus. German agents went to Iraq to stir rebellion against Britain and promised to finish the railway. Britain invaded Iraq again to protect oil and transport routes. History repeated itself. The battle locations changed, but the goal stayed the same: control the route, control power. After World War II, the British Empire collapsed under debt. The United States stepped in. America took over Britain's fear of losing control of the Middle East, but used different methods. Instead of colonies, they used coups and alliances. They were just as afraid of another power controlling Eurasia. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union became the new threat. The US feared Soviet tanks moving through the same mountain paths as the railway. Turkey became a key NATO ally, not for democracy, but because of its location between East and West. Now jump to the 21st century. The similarities are clear and frightening. A new industrial power is challenging a dominant naval power. China is the new Germany. The United States is the new British Empire. The Belt and Road Initiative is the new Baghdad Railway. Like Kaiser Wilhelm, China knows it is weak at sea. The U.S. Navy controls major shipping routes. In a war, the U.S. could block China's energy supplies. So China is building massive projects across Eurasia: high-speed trains, pipelines, and highways linking China to Europe and the Middle East by land. Look at the Belt and Road map. It closely matches the Baghdad Railway map, just much bigger. It tries to avoid sea routes controlled by the U.S. Navy. It aims to connect Asia, Europe, and the Middle East into one trading system without the United States. And just like Britain in the past, America is nervous. The headlines look the same. Chinese projects are called debt traps. China is accused of backing dictators. Chinese companies are blocked from ports and networks. The language is nearly the same as a century ago. The fear is the same. The story of the Baghdad Railway shows that when an empire feels threatened by infrastructure, it attacks. It uses money pressure, propaganda, and eventually war to stop the connection. The Middle East is once again the board where this game is played. Conflicts in Iraq, Syria, Iran, and Turkey all follow the same lines laid by rails long ago. This is not an accident, it is geography. The Ottoman Empire is a warning. They believed they could balance powerful nations. They thought they could take German money and stay independent. But when you let a superpower build your key systems, you do more than buy steel and concrete. You bring in their enemies. You make your land a target. The train meant to bring success brought disaster. It brought armies that destroyed the empire. Today, many developing countries face the same choice. They need roads, trains, and power. China offers fast, cheap construction. The West warns them away. They are stuck in a struggle much bigger than them. The lesson of the Baghdad Railway is that infrastructure is never neutral. A road is never just a road. It carries power. And powerful nations will burn the world before letting rivals control trade. When we watch the news and see chaos in the Middle East, we are told it is about religion or ancient hate. But dig deeper into history and you find rusted rails of a German railway never finished. You find a business deal that failed. You see that borders were not drawn to make nations. They were drawn to stop a train. The world we live in, the wars we fight, and the price of gas were shaped by the failure of the Baghdad Railway. The train that never arrived is still shaping the world. I'm John. Subscribe now to stay ahead, because when history is written, you will want to be among those who saw it coming. Empires do not fall how people expect, they fall how people ignore. If you see these patterns today, you know what comes next. If you think this documentary is wrong, explain where. If you think it is right, explain why. Either way, history is written by those who argue it. I read the comments. If you want to see the next empire fall, pay attention.